We have quite a devotion for you tonight, and here as we get started in our little devotion for Read Through the Bible, it is June 5th, and we're closing out the book of 2 Samuel. So, as you might imagine, it ends with quite a bang. Well, the remainder of chapter 23 lists what's called the 30. These were David's chief soldiers. They actually numbered about 37. Well, exactly 37. The last one mentioned is Uriah the Hittite, whom you'll recognize. He's one of the 5 non-Israelites in the list of the 30, and he's descended from the sons of Heth, who was the second son of Canaan. So he was a Canaanite. Yet his name means, "My light is Yahweh," or the Lord. This implies that Uriah and perhaps his parents and even other ancestors before him had been converted to the worship of Yahweh. You, of course, know that Uriah was the husband of Bathsheba, and he was the one that David murdered in order for David to cover up his adultery with Bathsheba. So that was, of course, a very sordid episode in the life of David. The first of the 30 in this list, Asahel, is one of David's soldiers who we know died in battle. So the first and the last ones listed here are the only members of the 30 known to have died in battle. Perhaps this foreshadows the twists and turns in the ending of 2 Samuel. Chapter 24 begins with the anger of the Lord being kindled against Israel. Though the reason for the Lord's anger isn't specified here, the most likely reason was because Israel had sinned when they had made Absalom king, in violation of the laws of Moses, since God was supposed to be the one that would choose their king. In the book of 2 Chronicles, we see that Satan's agency was how God incited David against Israel. This falls under the permissive will of God, you could say, and also God's alien work of punishing sin. Since all of this came about because of David's adultery, David himself was also to blame and not just Israel. So, David commanded Joab, his general, to take the census. It was primarily for military purposes in case Israel's enemies had seen Israel's strife and turmoil as an opening to attack them. Joab tried to be the voice of reason, and he opposed the census, but David didn't listen to him, unfortunately. Joab then prayed that Yahweh would multiply the nation 100-fold while David was still king. You see, victory doesn't come from the size of your army, but from Yahweh. The truth that victory can only come from the Lord is a major theme in the book of Samuel. And in David's finer moments, David also expresses this truth. Yet, now, David goes ahead with the census. The numbers that are listed are rounded off, 800,000 in Israel and 500,000 in Judah are the ones who can fight. After the completion of the census, David's conscience convicted him, and he confessed his sins and asked to be forgiven. All believers should so willingly confess our sins. None of us ever gets to the point where we have no need for regular confession and absolution. Then, through the prophet Gad, Yahweh gave David a choice of what the consequence for his sin would be. David was forgiven, but sin still carries a consequence. Each of the potential consequences got shorter in length, but was more severe than the previous one. So David had to choose between 3 years of famine, having their foes pursue them for 3 months, or 3 days of pestilence. David really didn't choose. He only asked that they may fall into the hand of the Lord and not into the hand of man. God then chose the plague. It started on the morning and lasted until the appointed time. 70,000 men died. We see that the angel of the Lord was about to strike Jerusalem when Yahweh relented and ordered the angel to stop. The location of this was the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. This threshing floor was an outdoor area where grain was threshed. Barley or wheat was collected and the unwanted parts of the plant were discarded. This was accomplished by first running a sledge over the harvest to separate the grain from the stalks. Then the grain and the chaff, that is, the crushed pieces of the stalks, were thrown up into the air with threshing forks. This process was repeated as necessary. The lighter chaff tended to blow downwind, while the heavier grain fell more directly downward. This is where David saw the angel of the Lord with his drawn sword in his hand ready to strike. As the story unfolds, we see that David speaks to the Lord by speaking to the person that is the angel of the Lord. In other words, the angel wasn't merely an angelic messenger, it was God himself, that is the pre-incarnate Christ. The prophet Gad serves as the go-between, letting David know that Yahweh had accepted his plea for mercy. And David, following the command of Yahweh, built an altar on the threshing floor. Remarkably, this is the only time in the whole book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, that the clause, just as Yahweh commanded, is used. In the end, David pays about 20 ounces of silver for the land, which was the fair value for a large field to be consecrated to God in Leviticus. So David paid more than what normally would be expected. And David performs the sacrifices there. This was the place that God had now chosen for the temple one day to be built. This temple would be the divinely appointed place where sacrifices for sin would be offered to God. In the fullness of time, on Golgotha, in the vicinity of the temple, Jesus, David's descendant and true God, would offer himself as the perfect, all-sufficient sacrifice that takes away the sin of the world. Thus, the messianic prophecies given to David by God would be fulfilled both for David and for us. May God bless you and keep you in his care, and I'll look forward